Alright everybody, Cranky Motorsports here. Memorial Day 2019. I have some big plans. Behind this door, as many of you know, is my 53 Bel Air. I'm going to open it up here. So a lot of you know I've been working on this car for not even quite a year yet. I bought it last July, so I've only had it for about 10 months. My philosophy on project cars is I try not to buy cars that take more than a year to get to a point where I can at least move them around and drive them, because that keeps me motivated to keep working on them. So you guys have seen a little bit of progress on this car. This is the final weekend to get this thing running. I have very little left to do. I have to hook up the oil line, get some wiring for the starter and the ignition switch in this thing so I can get it to turn over. I got to flush out the radiator, refill it with some water, and then basically test for leaks and crank the thing over. I am very, very close to getting this thing running. I'm super stoked. This motor, I talked about it a little bit. It's a 305 HO out of an 86 Monte SS. It's a motor that actually I bought off a buddy of mine when he needed some money. It's been passed around for a couple of years between friends, and it's finally going into another project. So it's in my car now, and it has the small 58cc chamber heads on it that I kind of went through. I just lapped the valves, put new valve springs, new seals and everything in it, new keepers and all that stuff. So they're freshened up. I won't say they're rebuilt. My term on rebuilt has changed a lot since I started hanging out with my buddy at the machine shop that actually does the correct work on engines. So I just say it's freshened up. The motor itself has like 4,000 miles on it since, and again, I use the term loosely, rebuilt. It did have new rings put in it back then, new bearings, but it was kind of a bastardized piece together motor. It has connecting rods that have like 3 number 2 connecting rod stamps on them. So I know the connecting rods are not original to the motor, but the crank and everything inside the motor looks good. There's no rust in the cylinders. There's no wear on the top of the cylinders because it's such a low hour motor since it did get rebuilt. And did some unique stuff in here. I did a serpentine belt setup with basically the bottom crank pulleys off of an 80s Camaro. The top pulley on the water pump was one I bought off of eBay. That's an aluminum one. And then the alternator is a standard 80s GM 3-wire alternator that I put the serpentine belt pulley on it. And the belt itself I think is like off of a 2006 Altima or something like that. It's for the AC compressor, I believe. Standard mechanical fuel pump. Has a pressure regulator with a gauge on it because Edelbrocks don't like more than 6 pounds pressure, and the GM factory pumps tend to put out about 9 psi that bumps back and forth, so it doesn't give a real steady fuel pressure, and it doesn't really give you the correct fuel pressure for the car. So I did put a regulator and a gauge on there so I can monitor the fuel pressure once this thing starts up. And then inside the car, what I've been working on is getting the gauges hooked up. So I have the water temp gauge connected. I gotta loop up the line under the dash so that doesn't get ruined, and I really hate how mechanical water temp gauges, that line is so fragile, but I really like the gauges, and as long as you don't bend those in a sharp 90 degree, typically they last pretty well. And then the voltmeter I'm not gonna hook up yet. The oil pressure gauge, that has to get hooked up before I start the thing, and I did get the copper line kit for that because I don't particularly like the plastic ones. So I gotta do the oil, and then I need to hook up my ignition switch with a power from the battery, a power switched out to the coil, and then the wire going out of that to the starter. Eventually I'm going to put a push button starter in this as well as the ignition, kind of as a safety factor, and just because I like push button starts, they're cool. So that's where I'm at today. I don't really have too much to do to get it going, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Catch you guys in a little bit. Alright, so a little update on the Bel Air again. Today is now Wednesday, 2 days after Memorial Day, and I did not get my car running on Memorial Day. So long story short, what happened, I was getting all the wiring done, went under the car to install the starter, and the starter didn't fit. Realized I had the wrong bell housing. I had a 55 to 57 bell housing, which has a starter that bolts on with 3 bolts in the front of it versus bolting into the block. Also, I have a 168 tooth flywheel. That particular bell housing and the Bel Airs from that period were 153 or 152 tooth flywheels. So the starter, even if I bought the right starter for the flywheel, it wouldn't have worked. So what I ended up having to do was pull out the bell housing. I got a 80s bell housing off of a Chevy SM 465 4-speed, which ends up working out pretty well because it has the correct bolt pattern for the side mount hydraulic slave cylinder as well. So killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Now I don't have to make a bracket for it. The one I got, I ended up getting it for free from my cousin, and it has a couple of cracks in it, not in areas that really matter. But for right now, it's the best thing I have, so I'll at least be able to get the car started and going, and then later on down the road I'll change it. Luckily, changing the bell housing is like 45-minute job. Super easy. There's like 12 bolts to get it out and on. So that's where I'm at with that. I was able to get, well, so after I changed the bell housing, I still had the wrong starter because I had ordered an automatic starter for a 305. As it turns out, a manual transmission 305 has a totally different starter than one for an automatic. So I ended up picking up a starter for a 79 Camaro with a 4-speed, bolted right in, worked with the new Saginaw bell housing. So that stuff's all worked out. And apologize, my garage is really dark. Yeah, you're not going to be able to see anything, so I'll go back outside. So I got the starter wired up just to the battery right now. What I'm working on now is the alternator wiring from the alternator to the starter, and then from the starter up to a temporary fuse panel on the firewall. And I say temporary because it's only a 6 circuit fuse panel. So basically what that's going to be is my power coming from my battery, or from my alternator going through my starter, also back to my battery, which is going to go up to that fuse panel, and that's going to give me power for my ignition so I can at least start the car. So it'll be a fuse on there in case anything blows. I still want to have it fused, even though it's just literally running the distributor and the power for the tachometer right now. But I really wanted to have a fuse on there anyway. So that's where I am with that. Still working on putting the rest of the wiring together. I'm going to see if I can get a short little video here with the camera with the light on, so bear with me. But where I am now, see the brand new starter in there, and can't really see the bell housing, but it's back there and it clears now. So this is my temporary fuse block, and basically what I'm working on now, this 10 gauge wire is going to connect on the starter lug right with the battery terminal. I'm also going to run a wire from there over to the lug on the alternator, and then from there up to this fuse panel as well. So that wire will be charging the battery as the power comes from the alternator, goes through the battery cable at the starter, also giving me power up to this block. I have an ignition switch inside the car that is right now wired up to the distributor and wired up to the tachometer. So once I get power pulled up to this thing, I have to put ground cable on the engine block. I'm going to put an additional ground cable on the other side of the block, so I'll put one from the block to the frame, from the frame to the battery, and then on the other side of the motor from the block to the frame. I'll also add one in the back of the car, just a strap style, to go from the body down to the frame so I have good ground everywhere. Other than that, I have to put hose clamps on the bottom of the radiator. I was going to flush the radiator, but what I might do for now is, this has been stored in a kind of a dusty garage, but it hasn't been used for a long time, so if you look inside, it's pretty clean. So what I may do is just fill it up with water for now, and get the cap off here. Oh, can't get the cap off, must be stuck. Brand new cap. Oh, I gotta push down and turn, that's why. So, see, inside, I mean, it's not terrifically clean. It's kind of an older radiator. It's off of a El Camino, I think. So, I mean, it's got some dirt in there. I mean, just dust. It actually just looks like, you know, old dried up antifreeze or whatever. But it doesn't look too bad. So what I may do is just put water in it for now, run it, and then once the motor gets up to temp and everything gets heated up and then cooled off after I break in the cam, I'll probably pull the plugs out of the bottom of the block and clean that out. But I do have to wire up the alternator. I have to put the plug in there and put a jumper wire down to the pin, so it'll basically turn a 3-wire alternator into a 1-wire. And then the other wire coming off the alternator, I'm going to run it up to the dash with a charge light, so you can see what's going on there. And yeah, I mean, I'm trying to keep everything on the car pretty clean. So my temp gauge comes up there. I put some little grommets on the valve cover to be able to hold it. Another one there, and then the oil line and the water temp line go through the firewall. I have a piece of hose that I cut down and zip tied onto them to hold them in place. And there's going to be as little wiring in this car as I can possibly get away with. So I have my tack wire and my power wire going back to my ignition. As I go into the car, right now the ignition switch is just hanging out here, but this is going to be power for the distributor. This is power for the tachometer right now, and currently I'm just using this crummy SunPro tack that was in my dad's pickup. I'm going to use that temporarily until I get everything working and then figure out how to wire the correct one for this. There's my water and oil gauges. Those are already hooked up. My voltmeter I still have to hook up. But it's coming along, so even though I was supposed to have it running on Memorial Day, it didn't end up happening. I'm going to try to get it running hopefully by this weekend. And a couple other things I got done last week. I got my gas pedal put in, so just a universal hot rod gas pedal. You can basically install it at any angle you want, and it's cable actuated, so that'll work fine. Brake pedal is in there. Master cylinder's right here under the floor. I don't have any brake lines in the car yet, so that's something else I need to work on. Got my choke installed, and the funny thing is, this is actually a choke cable from a Sears Suburban, so some tractor parts get in the car that'll make it run better, obviously. So none of this stuff's going to work, the blower and all that stuff. I'm going to leave the controls in here, but I'm basically just going to disconnect the cables. They're not going to go anywhere because I don't have any heating controls or anything in here. I already ripped them all out. So that's that. That's a quick update, and I'll get back to you soon.